I love this quote from Orwell: "The further a society drifts from truth, the more it will hate those who speak it." So we know, even by this short exercise, that this is a challenge. Media literacy is a challenge. And so we're at Getting Smart. None of us are media literacy experts, but we're really curious about learning about what's happening out in the ecosystem, especially K-12 space, also higher ed, about how do we help a generation of humans adapt to a massive information overload, much of which may not be true. So we're going to talk a little bit through today. We're going to do a couple different sections, and after each section, we'll pause, give everyone a chance to reflect to help inform our collective knowledge around this. And feel free to push back when you see things that you don't agree with. So let's start with what is media. It feels pretty obvious, but media is anything that's communicated. So all information and communication, and it's trying to make us do something, to change our opinion, to make us feel a certain way, to evoke an image, to evoke a story, to convince us of something. So media is a really broad set of anything that's communicated, all information. So just setting a baseline there. And then media literacy, the organization, the National Association of Media Literacy Educators, is a great resource, but they define it as the ability to access, analyze, and evaluate, create, and act using all forms of communication. So just think about these as our basic standing definitions, and then think about what young people and adults need to be media literate. And so I really like this. If you haven't jumped onto Ad Fontes Media website, it's free. You can jump on there and you can play around and zoom in on this tool. But this tool is really, it takes all news sources that are out there that they're evaluating, and it evaluates them for left versus right, so political bent. And then it evaluates them. On the lower left is inaccurate and fabricated info. On the top is original and fact reporting and high effort. So there's an obvious mathematical correlation here. As in my old days, I used to teach math, and this would be a great modeling exercise for an inverse parabola, because when you look at it and you actually map it out, it puts a perfect curve here. And what that means is, when we're talking about media, if we can remember, one of the big takeaways from this is that the more someone's trying to convince you of something, the lower the reliability is of that information. So the center, which is least extreme, is probably the most reliable. So when you think about tools, if you're an educator or you're working with schools or districts, think about helping young people understand that curve of reliability. The more extreme, the more or the less reliable it is when you look at the analysis. I think this also is a great news literacy project. We're going to reference a bunch of different organizations that are doing really incredible work in this space. And so we'll list them all in the show notes, and so you can go and reference them. And each of those websites have tons of resources, so we encourage you to go and explore. But this report that came out in 2024's News Literacy in America, I wanted to pull out a few specific things from this. So, and they surveyed a bunch of students. It was 1,100 students, so statistically significant and this is last May, 2024. So a little under a year ago. So a couple takeaways. There's many takeaways in this report. I encourage you to go explore it. But the ones that were really profound for me is, one is that teens want media literacy instruction included in their education, but most are not getting it. So we have a deficit in terms of the instruction that's happening. Number two, regardless of age, teens struggle to distinguish between different types of information. And even us trying to figure out true versus false, AI versus human, we struggle, right? So it is becoming harder and harder to really understand and distinguish between different types of information. Around the press, nearly half of teens in this survey think the press does more to harm democracy than protect it. Conspiracy stuff. Most teens on social media encounter conspiracy theories and are inclined to believe one or more of them. And then AI. Only 36% of teens report having at least a fair amount of trust in AI tools to generate accurate information, while half of teens report having little to no trust in the accuracy and fairness of these AI tools. Yet, they, along with all other humans in the world that are accessing technology, are going to be exposed to more and more AI-generated media. So when you think about this, and this report is just fascinating to think about, this is the next generation of individuals that are going to grow up to become adults. They're going to be voting, they're going to be contributing, they're going to be deciding to participate or not. And these are the things that they're growing up with. So we have a prerogative and an obligation to think about, how do we up the superpower, which is being really media literate, which we think is really important. Policy is catching up, which is good news. Policy isn't the solution for everything, but it is a top-down approach to media literacy. If you want to keep up to date on media literacy policy, Media Literacy Now is a great organization. We just released a blog post on them after doing an interview with Erin McNeil, who runs that organization. And she's tracking and trying to understand with her org all the different policies that are out there. I would note, so a couple things here is one, not a lot of states have specific curriculum policies to say, hey, this is what you need to do. It's not written into the standards, et cetera. Only a few states. So if you look at the full houses, the Georgia, the New Jersey, the Delaware, only a few states have a full requirement to include instruction in K-12 classrooms. And the other piece is that even when the whole country is filled with purple, which ideally it may, I think there's more and more laws and legislation being presented, the implementation of that, we of course know, is much slower. So we have a long tail here that we need to, or a long road in terms of creating media literate students and helping develop them into media literate adults, as we ourselves struggle with this as well. We're going to go into the next set of foundational pieces. So we just identified media. What is media literacy? So let's talk a little bit about AI and media and how it's impacting. And some of you already predicted this through your chat comments. So a couple things here is we are thinking about this in 3 different phases of media. So media 1.0, media 2.0, media 3.0. We just want to give a few examples of this. And this helps contextualize the world we're in. And so, of course, most of human history has been spent in media 1.0. So humans generating media content. We as humans have control and we're doing something. We're writing something down, we're telling a story, creating a video, putting something online. Very recently, over the last couple of years, we've been creating we've been in media 2.0. So humans use AI to generate media content. And we'll give some examples of that. And in media 3.0, AI agents, and we'll talk about that. So this is our sequence of what's happening. And we're now in this media, approaching rapidly this media 3.0 world. So obvious to most of us on this call, but just a reminder that there was more data created in the last 3 years than in all of history. And I think I'll just leave that at this, is that humans generate media content in media 1.0, but we are now generating it at a massively faster rate than we ever have in the past. And some of that's, of course, due to population. Second thing, obviously, is technology and the internet. So just understanding that every single minute, massive volumes of information are being produced, which makes it harder and harder for students to be media literate in our world. All right, media 2.0, a couple things here. So humans using AI to generate media content. Most of you have probably experimented with Notebook LM out of Google Labs. If you haven't done so, try it. So essentially you can feed it a number of materials, PDFs and videos and things like that. It will create a podcast for you as one of the features, which is fairly interesting. And whether or not the podcasts are true or a good representation of the material is hard to discern. But the AI persons that are doing the podcast sound very human. And they just added a new feature where I can actually jump into that podcast and join the podcast. Fascinating, right? So how does that help with media literacy? So humans using AI to generate media content, i.e. new podcasts as an example. Last one, which convolutes the issue of media literacy even further, is this idea of media 3.0, which is AI agents. So agents that are operating autonomously, given directions by a human, but then doing and making decisions by themselves, actually creating media. And so this is already happening. So this is not science fiction at this point. You can go on to Twitter or X, but the app itself is called a Twitter AI agent, and it can run an account for you. It can reply, it can post, it can like, it can generate whatever you would like to do. It can operate autonomously on social media. So imagine that for any type of media generation. So this is media 3.0. Large numbers of AI bots that are out there, AI agents, who are generating media content. And so this becomes even more important for young people and adults to understand who is generating what. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second and see what's happening here. Dan, you've been chatting a lot, so you get the honor of coming off mic. So your last comment's interesting. What's the good reminder for us?
Yeah, I really try to help people focus on what are the human skills that we need to be working on, regardless of the tech that shows up. And this has been a drum I've been beating for 2 decades, and it's nothing new. But to your earlier point, the volume, the pace, just the pace of change, the pace of conversation, the pace of content is so ramped up and so big that it sometimes feels like we just have to give in to the machine or give in to the thing that's overwhelming, and that there are really core human qualities that are very difficult for machines to get good at, which are inquiry, genuine questioning, authenticity, communication, robust collaboration. Those things are hard to always make happen in a machine-based world. So I'm just always trying to bring people back, like, yes, shiny, awesome, new, cool. However, that's going to be running you unless you as the human are running it. And in order to do that, you've got to have this set of skills, because we're not done. This isn't done. We're not done. This isn't the end. This is just going to keep happening. So
Yeah.
what do we need to do as humans to stay up to speed with it?
I totally agree, and really appreciate that comment, is that there is a need to be media literate to keep up with the shiny and new. Obviously, that's how we operate in the world. And there's an equally important need to double down on the uniquely human skills that we think are important for the world and our own survival, right? And I think, unfortunately...
And I'd say media literacy is in there, though, too.
Sure.
Like, I wouldn't say that's a different...
It is one of the important skills, yes.
Because you need to be inquiry and you need to have good communication.
Yeah. And the challenge is, as we've been talking about, is the volume has increased and the access has increased. So, all right, great. Let's pivot. Reedy, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Reedy Saraf. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Ed3DAO. We're a nonprofit that helps educators skill up in emerging technology through courses, online courses, in partnership with universities, a global community of practice, some AI resources, as well as R&D. Awesome. So I don't know if you all saw Mark Zuckerberg's announcement in the last, I think, 2 weeks or so. He announced that across all of their platforms, Facebook, Instagram, that they will no longer be fact-checking anything that goes on their platforms. And they will also no longer be policing any type of slander or anything that's like offensive. And so what that means is that not only because of that, but because of AI-generated content, there is this huge influx of nutrient-poor information, or what we call infobesity. So there's just a lot of information coming at us, not just students, but all of us as humans, that is just nutrient-poor, that isn't potentially truthful, that is potentially harmful. And that's the thing that we really need to counteract here. We need to counteract the infobesity. And right now, since 2023, there's been 1,000% increase in AI-generated content online, and fake news is 6 times more likely to be spread than the truth. And so you can see how there is a huge potential for all of us to be consuming information that is nutrient poor. This is an example of how easy it is to create AI-generated content that could be fake. So there's this new app called OmniHuman. And it's easier than ever to create deep fakes. You can take one image, you can take a screenshot of me right now, and you can create a very realistic looking video. Mason, would you mind clicking on that for us to see?
What would art be like without emotions? It would be empty. What would our lives be like without emotions? They would be empty of values.
Thank you.
So
so you can see how the facial expressions and the voice look so real, and that is just based on one image. So what's happening with AI and with media generally is not only is there more fake content, but there's also these echo chambers that we're creating for ourselves. We have these filter bubbles where we're only given what we want to see based on the algorithm that we're more inclined to click on. We have confirmation bias, so we'll search for the things that we want to be true, and because there's so much information online, it will basically confirm what you're already thinking. We have the attraction to people that are similar to us, so we're basically trying to find information and find groups of people that are similar to us. And we also have cognitive dissonance, where you feel uncomfortable with your beliefs being challenged. And so you're more inclined not to look at that information and more inclined to look at the information that makes you feel comfortable. That's where echo chambers come in. There's this new book called Filter World by Kyle Chayka. He says that algorithms are flattening our culture because of these echo chambers that are being created through the algorithms that you're clicking on. An example that he presents is no matter where he goes in the world, he always sees the same type of cafe, because the cafes now are basically Instagrammable, and we have this particular aesthetic that we're trying to create in these cafes. And so you'll find that type of cafe anywhere, right? So we're basically flattening the type of diversity that we're seeing out in the world. And this leads to something called logical fallacies. Now, logical fallacies are these very general things that apply to anything. But the thing that is really important with logical fallacies and AI is that they're basically exacerbated because of AI. So the first logical fallacy I wanted to introduce you guys to that you can use to apply to your evaluation of media is hasty generalization fallacy. So this fallacy occurs when a conclusion is drawn based on limited or insufficient data. Now, with AI, large language models are often relying on internet data to generate content, but we know that the internet data is heavily skewed towards the global north. And so when I tried to ask Gemini or ChatGPT for an image of a CEO, I get this white man. And then also there's something called data voids that are created. So when there isn't enough information or it isn't enough content that the LLMs can pull from, it basically makes it up. There's hallucinations. And that's the example of this is if you remember when Google's AI overviews on Google were recommending glue as a pizza topping. And that was because there was a data void and they didn't know how to answer that question. So they basically made it up. It's called the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. And this fallacy involves assuming causal relationships when no actual relationships exist. And with AI, this is related to biased algorithms. And so when developers are designing algorithms for LLMs, they are actually designing algorithms based on what they know and what they want the bias to be. So a really good example of this is if you remember when Gemini was producing images of only people of color, regardless of the context, that was because while Gemini and Google were trying to create more diversity in their product, they were actually creating a biased algorithm that was actually impacting the way that we were consuming the content that was coming out of that LLM. The next fallacy is a false premise fallacy. And this is basically when you're starting from a faulty starting point and you're basing all of your conclusion based on that faulty starting point. And so what's really important with prompting in LLMs, which a lot of people actually still are unaware of, is that you can't give an LLM just one prompt and then expect it to give you the answer that you really are going to benefit from. And so on the left, you'll see just shooting one prompt into the air and into the LLM and basically getting a very many different responses that might not get you to what you want. Instead, the way that you want to prompt LLMs is you want to give them a prompt and then give them feedback over and over again until you get to the target. And the thing to know about this is you have to be wary of all of these websites out there that give you these like prompt starters and these prompts that will get you like the perfect like PBL lesson or whatever, because it's not. It's going to get you something that is going to be very limited because the way that LLMs work best is that they really need the feedback in order to be able to give you what you really need. And the last fallacy is the appeal to authority fallacy. And this basically refers to assuming that what you're getting from AI is the truth because it's AI or because it's an authority piece of technology or figure or whatever it is. And so here we really need to be critical of what we're consuming from any AI model because we don't know what the source is. Sometimes we don't know what the algorithm is, and we don't know if it's actually true or not. So those are 4 logical fallacies out of many that might be helpful in understanding where content is coming from and how you might want to interact with AI tools.
Yeah, and we'll just finish up. We talked and alluded to this a minute ago, but just this idea that the amount of information has grown over time, and humans as a species, we struggle with this sort of fantasy of infallibility, that any new type of information is the most true. And so humans started with stories and talking about and sharing stories, which was information creating, moved to writing, printing and printing press, audio, visual, internet, social media, and now AI influencing all of this. And that process of creating more and more information, I think, comes with the fact that information is neither true nor false. Some of it is true and some of it is false. It's not always true. And I think helping young people understand the role of information in their worlds and how it in fact impacts everything that they do, whether they're consuming or interacting or voting, whatever the case may be. I just finished Harari's new book. He wrote Homo Sapiens, which was his previous book among a number of other books. And if you haven't read Nexus yet, it's really worth a read to really understand the challenges of information and how AI is impacting that.
Yeah. So how do we think about superpowers for the age of AI? What are the skills that we actually need? And so if we look at all of the things that we talked about today, looking at the logical fallacies, looking at critical thinking is really important. One of the main sort of like pieces here is self-governance. We said a little bit, folks in the chat were talking a little bit about this, which is we can't lose the ability to be able to assess whether something is true or not and be able to self-govern ourselves. If we put too much on AI, if we rely too much on AI, then we will be giving decision-making power to AI. An example of this that I often talk about is GPS. Like there's no way I can get anywhere without GPS right now. That's not as detrimental as having AI make decisions for me, but it is not the best sort of ability to have right now. Another superpower is just understanding how generative AI works, its strengths and limitations. If we don't understand how it actually works, then we won't understand what we can actually do with it. And that leads to AI use cases, which is what can we use generative AI for? A really great way to think about this is don't think about what AI can do. Think about what you need AI to do for you, right? So oftentimes we rely on using the technology to the limit of what it can do and basically complying to that. But it's not about that. It's about how we can optimize our use of it, our pedagogy, and be able to like benefit from it instead of just acquiescing to what its limits are. And the last one is building cognitive capacities. A really important part of this is off-ramping from AI. So imagine for a second, if the entire world were to shut off the internet and AI was not existing for the next week, right? Would you be able to function and would you be able to thrive, right? That's the sort of world that you want to be able to accommodate, because if you aren't able to thrive in that world, then that means that you don't have the capacities to be able to be self-sovereign, right? And so we really want to use AI, but we want to be able to off-ramp of AI from AI whenever we need to and basically build that human cognition.
Yeah, I think I just want to call out, Jennifer, if you don't mind coming off mute, if you're able, but just your comment about the questioning coming naturally in a lot of classrooms where students are questioning the validity of what the teachers are teaching. If you don't mind, just expand upon that a little bit, because maybe a lot of teachers don't like that. So how does that fit within this discussion here?
It goes to, one, the teacher's comfort level in terms of the content that they're teaching. And so I give the example of a science teacher who's talking about a certain erosion or whatever. It comes into it. It's funny because I was having this conversation with a science teacher this week about how she was presenting something. And I think it had to do with animals that over their lifespan go from female to male or vice versa. And she said the kids, you could see it going through their minds of nature does that, and that thinking of transgender and things like that. She could actually see in there that it was like, hey, this is going against, what I'm hearing at home kind of thing. And I think it's that confidence that you have in what you're teaching and how you're able to show students that there are things here that supersede opinion, that there are things that go beyond the bias. And so I think part of it is a teacher's confidence in what they're teaching and being able to have conversations that aren't threatening to students and threaten their biases that they're learning at home and where they're coming from in terms of what you were talking about previously. And so we've had some discussions in schools also about looking at teachers' bodies and how they react to certain things that students say, and how even their physical reaction in terms of whether they move away from a student or they go towards a student in terms of their confidence in dealing with the situation. So I think those two things combined.
Yeah, and it seems like there's an opportunity. That's really helpful, Jennifer. Thank you for amplifying that. I think there's this meta piece here. If you think about the echo chamber slide that Rudy had put up, is part of media literacy is understanding that there is cognitive dissonance. You're giving an example of cognitive dissonance. Teacher presenting something that doesn't align with my worldview. And how do we help young people and adults, their parents, teachers, et cetera, because we all struggle with it, is how do we help them understand what is a different viewpoint? If that viewpoint is an opinion or is it a fact? All these kind of questions are out there, and it feels like this gets harder and harder. And so doubling down on this meta reflection of making sure students are understanding how their thinking is happening as they interpret and digest things that they perceive as facts or opinions or what they want to believe in. So
Yeah, and this goes back to Mel's earlier point in the chat where she said educators have to be courageous. But then I responded back being like, there's a lot of fear here, right? Fear of losing your job and things like that. So I wonder if one of the potential solutions is not to actually present a teacher's opinion, right, when she's teaching something. It's to present critical thinking skills and allow students to be able to evaluate their own opinions, right, on and the content themselves. And so like the main goal here is really teaching kids critical thinking skills. It's not teaching kids any particular opinion. And I think if we encourage teachers to frame the way that they're teaching about media literacy in that way, and not in the sort of biased perspective where we're only presenting the right or the left or whatever it is, there might be less fear and more acceptance in doing that.
yeah, and I think really that's a good point. I think teachers are more and more aware of that, but some of it's our unconscious bias, like falling into place. We struggle with our own understanding of the world and where we're influenced. So yeah, I agree 100%. So okay, we're going to move on to the one last piece here, and then we'll move on to some action steps. There are many different frameworks out there that have been created by incredible media specialists and librarians and English teachers. And so I just wanted to throw up a bunch of them on here. We probably all learned one or two of those. What we're wrestling with, Reedy and us at Getting Smart, and Reedy and I are going to present at ASU GSV on this similar topic, is how do we adapt these or one of these or create a new one that's relevant to the age of AI?
Our nonprofit actually has a course on critical analysis and media literacy in the age of AI. It basically teaches educators how to look at AI from the perspective of all of these logical fallacies and things like that, but also from understanding how to use critical thinking to evaluate media literacy, as well as using AI to evaluate AI-generated media literacy content. And so it's a super cool course. You can also take it for free. If you haven't taken a course with us before, you're eligible for a $200 credit. And somebody earlier wanted to create a course for students. So what I would recommend is take this course as a teacher and then build one that's similar to this for students, because it'll actually give you all the tools and resources you need.
Awesome. So, and there's a handful of other courses out there, a lot of good stuff that's starting to emerge, but recommend taking a look at this as a resource. A couple things just from a practices standpoint. So are you aware of your own, a set of reflective questions? Are you aware of your own media use? Do you have a set of good resources? Someone alluded to this in the chat before. There are some resources out there. They're not nearly as robust as, say, ELA resources or math resources or science resources. We're still growing the body of excellent work around here. Is it present across the curriculum, or is it a single course or a single unit in a particular grade level? And that's some of our long-term goals, is how do you get this embedded so that every student graduates with a superpower in media literacy? And then are students practicing this all the time? Are they always practicing questioning, understanding what they're reading, the biases that are associated with it? And then actually, are they changing behavior? If you remember the data that I showed before from the very early in the presentation, we talked about students are reporting very distinct things about their own media use. How do we know and understand if those things are changing over time? So something to think about there. Couple different pieces here. NAMLE did a snapshot report, State of Media Literacy in 2024. Again, check out their website and take a look. But this stuff is fairly obvious, is that what are the challenges? So competing curricular requirements, we know there's obviously too much to cover. Lack of time is parallel to that. Lack of understanding, that 13%, and then funding. That takes up the big part of what are the barriers here. So how can we collectively, all of us have influence in our various spheres, is how do we collectively help eliminate those barriers? And then what are the contexts? Is that it's really interesting that libraries still maintain a particularly important context. Scheduled events, which are going to be some sort of webinar or some sort of presentation, et cetera, and then informal context. So the idea of required course is at 12% of respondents, or a key pillar of the organization, 12% of the respondents. So we're still really low on the deeply embedded side for media literacy education. We mentioned a bunch of these folks already, but just some tools that are out there. All these websites will be in the show notes. There's a bunch of people thinking about this, and they have a lot of resources on their sites. I'm sure we've forgotten things, and if we have, make sure you put them into the chat or send them to Mason so that we can make sure we include them to make sure that we're well-rounded in who we're representing out there. I do recommend there's a couple different news sites. If you're looking for immediate, I want to go try this in a classroom or coach someone who's doing this in their classroom. Ground News is a great website to look at any particular news item and see if it's left-leaning, center, or right-leaning in terms of how that thing has been reported and emphasized on those different sort of political sides of things. So it really is illuminating in that area. And then the other one that Reedy introduced me to was Verity. And Verity is a really cool tool where it has a bunch of news articles from a variety of different places. They're not generating news, they're actually aggregating news. And then as you move your slider bar from left to right, you'll see how those different news articles change and whether or not they support it or they don't support it. And actually, it'll change the frame of all the news items that you're seeing along the way. So you can see how different sides of the political aisle and how the establishment is saying yes or no in terms of support around these particular news items. So really easy tools between this site, between the one I talked about before, and all the other organizations that are thinking about media literacy deeply. All right, let's stop there. The big question we have is we're really looking for any schools or districts that have really great embedded K-12 media literacy programs. And so if you know of one, feel free to throw it into the chat or email us separately. We'd love to do a profile on them, write a blog post, do a pod or something like that to start amplifying people who are doing this at the school level as practitioners. Reedy, anything else?
No, just that there's some really good resources in the chat as well from our audience members, which is great. And just that media literacy and infobesity, I think, are going to get more and more difficult to consume as more content comes into play. So as adults, we have a little bit of a critical thinking lens. Some of us, most of us too, students are developing that. And so this is a really important topic that we should all start thinking about and getting into, and really start taking those courses and diving into the resources as much as you can. And obviously we're here to help if we can.
Well, I appreciate all the focus on harm avoidance that we've talked about today. It is super important. On that front, I want to stress that it's not just understanding who made the content. That's only part of it, because content is going to increasingly be artificially driven in part or in whole. It's understanding the value of that content, the degree to which it's accurate or useful, and how it was surfaced. So the algorithmic awareness of how did that content show up in my feed or in my search. So that's number one. Number two is we frame this as media literacy as an appropriate and important priority. I'd put that in a slightly broader context of AI literacy, and I think has to be a new graduation requirement for every high school student, probably for every 8th grade student. And AI literacy has to include, in addition to harm avoidance, a sense of possibility of what it enables each of us to do as professionals and citizens, that we, in the last few months, have crossed into a new threshold of human existence where each of us has access to expertise, even capability that we've never had access to. And that sense of possibility is something that I hope we can help every school create, so that young people have a new sense of how they can create value as a professional and as a citizen in their community.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. So there is certainly, we're at this pivot point as we have this incredible new technology. It could lead us down dark roads for sure. And part of the media literacy is helping young people prevent those paths from occurring in their lives. And then certainly if we can help them use it for purpose, for making the world a better place, for possibility, then we've used it for good. So this AI for good concept is really important. So appreciate that, Tom. All right, finishing off, just thank you everybody who joined us today. This is a specialty town hall on a really specific topic. If you have other ideas or people we should be talking to, please email Mason at Getting Smart to help us amplify this work and help more young people become media literate and the adults that they work with or are living with.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to the Getting Smart podcast today. We want this podcast to be actionable, insightful, and a great way to learn about what's next in learning. In order to stay on the cutting